Serenbe is a place where the innate connections humans have with nature and all living things is celebrated through work and play. And we're here to tell the stories of those who have been inspired by this biophilic way of life in our community and across the country. This is Serenbe Stories. As we kick off our season on biophilia and how together we can build a biophilic movement, we first want to define its meaning. Joining us today is Liz Calabrese, an architect and leading educator on biophilic design. She co-authored the Practice of Biophilic Design with Dr. Stephen Kellert and has been an integral figure in biophilia since 2010 and was one of the earliest teachers of biophilic design at the University of Vermont. She's worked closely with many of the key players who popularized the concept and teaches biophilia's role in the Living Building Challenge and Well Building certifications. In this episode, Liz leads us through the history of the term and shares how its definition and practice has involved both philosophical circles and the building industry. She shares beautiful quotes by those considered to be the founders of the movement and talks about what the future holds for biophilia. But first, Serenbe Stories is brought to you by the Inn at Serenbe. The Inn is nestled in the rolling countryside of bucolic Serenbe, where guests can walk on the 15 miles of trails through preserved forest land, the wildflower meadow, and the animal village. You can relax by the pool, hot tub, or in rocking chairs on the wraparound porch. Play on the croquet lawn, swings, and in-ground trampolines. Connect with nature and each other, all while staying in luxurious rooms on the Inn grounds or within the community of Serenbe. Book your stay today at serenbeinn.com. All right. Want to welcome everybody back today to Serenbe Stories. Today, we're very excited to have Liz Calabrese on the podcast today. And this is our kickoff for our biophilic movement season. And we thought Liz was the perfect person to sort of kick it off and tell us exactly what biophilia is, where it comes from, because she has done a ton of work in the field currently and with some of the biggies who really popularized the topic and the concept. So I want to welcome you, Liz, and also welcome Steve. Welcome back.
Hi, Monica and Liz. Glad to have you with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Liz, I always ask everybody, how did you come into our world? What is your Serenbe story? How did we first meet?
Actually, I learned about Serenbe through Bill Browning. And it was an interesting course of events because I first learned about biophilia through Bill Browning at a conference at the Omega Center that he presented about biophilia. And I'd gone with John Todd, who was my graduate advisor at the time, and he actually designed your your living wastewater system there.
That's right.
So it was really neat that was how I learned about Serenbe. So I'd always heard these amazing stories about Serenbe. And so one day as I was driving from Vermont to New Orleans, I stopped by and that's when I met all of you guys. So
right. And I think it was Stephen Peck that called you, who's going to be on later in the season.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, I've done a lot of work with Stephen Peck and the Green Roofs for Healthy Cities, a lot of workshops and design charrettes.
And so you showed up at the very tail end of our Biophilic Leadership Summit, I want to say in 2018 or 19? 19. Mm-hmm. And toured the charter school, the Chattahoochee Hills Charter School.
Yes, and that was amazing. Very inspirational.
Yeah, and we're going to have Patrick Mohammed on as well, who is the principal, to talk about biophilia and how public education and how important it is for kids.
Oh, excellent.
Well, and then you were just here. You were just here in Serenbe. You came back to see us. And why were you here recently?
Oh, for the Biophilia poster competition. That was amazing. It was a poster competition that John Hudson from Brand Culture put together along with Serenbe. And there were 3,500 poster submissions from countries all over the world. It was amazing to see.
Did you help jury that exhibition?
I did, yes.
Tell us a little bit about that. How did that whole thing come together?
Well, it was interesting. Are you asking about just the way we juried or how the poster competition came to be?
Either one. I mean, I just think it's wonderful that you kind of came into the world of, with John. John brought you into that with, I think, Phil Tabb and Bill Browning. And
right. Well, it was funny because last year when I came through Serenbe, I was at the Blue-Eyed Daisy, and this man was running, and he'd stopped running, and he was getting breakfast, and we started talking, and it was John, and he was about to meet with somebody about permaculture, a potential client, and he didn't really know what permaculture was. So I started explaining to him what permaculture was. Then we started talking about biophilia, and it was just one of those moments where you just meet somebody that you're supposed to meet because you're supposed to share information. And from that point on, he became really intrigued with biophilia and wanted to get more involved with Serenbe because he was moving there and just rented a place there. And then, he was the one who created this poster competition, which was so successful. And then the idea of putting biophilia out there for people to think about, how they connect to nature, and then how to show that graphically. And he explained the experience, the principles behind biophilic design and the experiences of biophilic design. So he gave them some information to incorporate into their posters, which was just really a wonderful activity.
So all those encounters, the Serenbe moments that happen pretty regular here, how people that you're supposed to meet just suddenly run into you somewhere here.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think if I recall, we ended up having like a little girl posse with Florence Williams, right? And who else was here that time?
Jennifer Walsh.
Jennifer Walsh. And the four of us ended up having lunch or dinner or wine or something. And we were trying to form a girl biophilic babes band or something. I can't remember quite what we were discussing. But, again, trying to figure out how do we popularize the concept? How do we get the word out to people about the importance of the idea of biophilia? Yeah. But that's a great way to sort of start with, what is it?
Well, it's interesting because when I first learned about it, I didn't actually understand how deep its origins were until I did a little more research and was corrected once at a conference. But the term was first used by Erich Fromm in his book, The Heart of Man, and he was a psychoanalyst. So he wasn't an ecologist, and he was looking at biophilia as the opposite of necrophilia. But more, not in a sexual way, but more in a death and destruction way. He was looking at like Stalin and Hitler and a narcissistic, destructive personality. So this is a quote, actually. It's really, I think it's important to hear this. He said, "I've been able to distinguish between various kinds of aggression, which directly or indirectly are in service of life, and that malignant form of destructiveness, necrophilia, which is a true love of death, as opposed to biophilia, which is the love of life. Love of life, independence, and the overcoming of narcissism form a syndrome of growth against the syndrome of decay formed by love of death, incestuous symbiosis, and malignant narcissism." So when you look at the world today with the destruction of the natural environment and global warming and just all the stuff happening, and you think about narcissism and destruction, it's actually a really profound definition as we go forward using this word biophilia in more of an ecological context.
That's fascinating. And what year was that?
1964.
Wow.
So it was 20 years later that E.O. Wilson brought forth that word again in his book, Biophilia. And he realized that there was something deep inside of him that connected with nature. And so he's the one who then brought the word more into an ecological, natural use. And if you don't mind, I'm going to read his quote, because I think hearing what the people that use these words, hearing their words is so important, rather than hearing my interpretation of what they did.
I love that. Please do.
He said, "Biophilia is the innate tendency to focus on life and lifelike processes. From infancy, we concentrate happily on ourselves and other organisms. We learn to distinguish life from the inanimate and move towards it like moths to a porch light. To explore and affiliate with life is a deep and complicated process in mental development. to an extent still undervalued in philosophy and religion. Our existence depends on this propensity. Our spirit is woven from it. Hope rises on its currents. And his use of the word hope is really amazing. And that was when Bill Browning first introduced the idea, the concept of biophilia at the Mega Institute at that conference. I was most taken by him referring to it as a sense of hope. And that's really pretty important in this day and age right now.
Yeah. Very important.
Yeah, we talk about hope quite a bit. And I hadn't heard that sort of part of E.O. Wilson's, that hope rises on its currents. It's really beautiful. I think that E.O. Wilson, the idea that we have this sort of genetic, connection, that there's actually a genetic need to be affiliated with nature, is really fascinating to me. And that in order for us to really have the personal fulfillment that we need, as well as like evolutionary, like with dependence for survival, you really need nature. And I just think,
and right now we're seeing it. Everyone's fleeing to nature. It's where they're finding peace, and the fires are actually hurting people. No matter where you live in the world, the fires destroying it are affecting people on an emotional level.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And it seems like such an obvious thing, when you hear it, but to have never really understood or known of the concept before is sort of fascinating. But then you had heard about it from this conference, but you also worked with Stephen Kellert, who was at Yale, because he really sort of popularized it as a design principle.
Correct. After I learned about it from Bill Browning, I bought the Biophilic Design books, and then reached out to Stephen Kellert, and he and I became close friends. And he worked with E.O. Wilson. He approached E.O. Wilson after the book Biophilia, and together they edited the book, The Biophilia Hypothesis, where they brought in many contributors, including Roger Ulrich, Judith Herwegen, a cross-discipline group who all wrote about biophilia and our connection to nature. And so that was the next step in the evolution of the concept. And then Stephen Kellert then took that idea towards the design approach and started looking at biophilic design. And his first book came out in 2005 called Building for Life. And it introduces the concepts of biophilic design. And then after that, he had a retreat with a lot of the same folks who had contributed to the biophilia hypothesis. And that's when the very important book, Biophilic Design, came out, and where he introduced the biophilic framework. But there again, it was very much an interdisciplinary group of folks. That's what makes it so powerful.
In his book, The Biophilia Hypothesis, which he worked on with E.O., is that considered more of like a textbook or an educational? I mean, because again, not having it really in the sort of general, cultural vernacular at all. And obviously we're trying to popularize it even further. How can we spread the word for this term? Like, where do you think it's been sitting in a very niche education world? Or like, where does biophilia sort of live right now? Or where has it lived sort of from the mid-90s to sort of, say, 5 years ago or a few years ago?
Well, it was interesting. I think it definitely was an academic concept. I think Steve's hope was to break down the academic silos and to have people working together. And that works very much in conjunction with E.O. Wilson's idea of consilience and, the humanities and sciences coming together to help solve problems. And, but it is interesting, about the time Steve Kellert passed away, all of a sudden biophilia was in the Living Building Challenge. It was in the Well Building Standard. So the whole idea just took off about the time he exited this earth, which is interesting.
Right. And how did you meet Stephen Kellert?
I just reached out to him as a master's student. I was at the University of Vermont, and John Todd was my graduate advisor. It was a mid-career master's. And I reached out to him as a student, and he became my mentor, and we were, great friends until he passed away in 2016.
Right. And you co-authored a book with him, or, that I know is available for anybody to read online.
Right. When he came out in 2008 with the original biophilic framework, it had 72 attributes. It was extremely comprehensive, but it was almost too much. I mean, as an architect, I was trying to remember all the attributes and the experiences, and it was a lot. And then Bill Browning actually was the first one to create a more simplified biophilic framework, and that was the 14 patterns of biophilic design. And he also wrote the economics of biophilia, and those are available open source online to Terrapin Bright Green. And then I think at that point, Steve was trying to simplify his framework, and the two frameworks are actually very similar. It just depends on how you think. Bill's is a little more research oriented. And I'd say Steve's biophilic was a little more ecologically based and ethically based.
Okay.
One of the things that the simplified framework that Steve and I worked on together, it has principles of biophilic design. And that's really important because it acts as kind of a compass to what Steve felt were the intentions behind biophilic design. So it doesn't just kind of go wild and become something that he never intended it to be.
And so give us some of the, for the listeners who probably, aren't in interiors, aren't designers, aren't architects, what are some of the, obviously we can understand wanting to go to a national park or being, awestruck by an incredible view at Yosemite. And those are all sort of part of, if you will, the biophilic hypothesis. But let's talk about design for a minute. What are some of the things that you and Stephen sort of pulled down from those 72 attributes? Like, what would you say in a building that would be a biophilic attribute?
If we look at the principles, one of the principles is that biophilic design, if used appropriately, fosters a repeated and sustained engagement with nature. And that can be done, directly or indirectly, or through space and place, the volumes of space, views to the outdoors, the ability to open a door and have fresh air move through a building. And that's something with COVID, people are realizing that when you have hermetically sealed buildings and poor air exchange systems, you're polluting your air. The ability just to open up a window is so important, yet it's something we've kind of forgotten about because we have these super energy efficient buildings that can heat and cool mechanically. But biophilia kind of brings you back to basics in a sense.
We have an Acton Academy school here that's, I think, little 3-year-olds to 8th grade, and they're all open the doors and they're out on the street now, and the ability for them to, kind of spill out from their classrooms into, whatever, the woods, the street, the park, is, invaluable at this point.
Right. Well, so I think that the concept of biophilia and biophilic design has become now so profound since COVID, in terms of the need for children to have outdoor classrooms, elderly to have access to outdoors, air exchange, sunlight, actual sunlight, and not just being under artificial light all the time. So I see a big shift about to happen.
One of the things I feel like Bill had mentioned in his design, which I think you and Stephen had put together, is this idea of when you're in a room, the vantage point. Why does everybody like the nook in the corner at the restaurant, right? The booth in the corner. It's because you're sort of protected with this vantage point out and this refuge. And I thought something like that. Will you talk a little bit about that? I was fascinated by why is that the most popular place to be in the restaurant?
Well, we respond choose space the way we evolutionarily responded to space. Where do we feel safe? Where do we feel protected? Or when does flight or fight kick in? And to have a good vantage point and be protected, which is, the term is prospect and refuge. When you feel that safety, you can be more at ease. If, for instance, let's say you're working at your office and people approach you from your back all the time, it's actually really hard to focus on your work and pay attention to what you're doing, because you're always instinctively, you need to know what's approaching behind you. It could be, a lion, a person, a friend, or a foe. And in biophilic design, it's not that nature is always good no matter what at any intensity. It's that we still respond to nature the way we did as we evolved as a species. So sometimes nature is scary and other times it's comforting. And it's kind of knowing as a designer what that means for what type, what culture or socioeconomic background of folks.
Mm-hmm. What other things do you find, in your work, are clients asking for? And this doesn't have to be, due to the COVID right now, but just have you found over the years that you've been able to bring clients along into more of a biophilic design in their buildings?
Yes. For years I did, and I still do, second homes up in Vermont. And often when people are building their Vermont home, what they're actually wanting is very biophilic. I don't use the term biophilic design with them, but they want natural materials. They want, great views. They want to feel snugly warm in the winter. They want fire with stone surrounds. So if you look at the patterns of typically what people want, and actually, if you look at your own patterns of what you crave in space, it's often very biophilic. And so then the idea is, how do you take that and actually offer biophilic design to people that actually need it the most?
I know a big study that I think I remember Steve telling me about, I don't know, it's probably a little bit dated now, but hospitals.
Absolutely.
We elaborate on that? I know, Steve, you've done a lot of study on assisted living and retirement and hospitals. The Netherlands and Europe has done an incredible job. I don't know, Steve, if you want to touch on that for a second.
Well, I just thought it was fascinating because, so much of the medical journal is so absolute science-based, but they have actually included all this research on how nature really affects people, and it's changed the design of hospitals today as you see it, and various procedures or art in the hospital rooms. And so I think it's great with this very narrow science-based group that maybe doesn't look at a lot of these things, has actually totally embraced these reports and research.
And Liz, I don't know if you are specifically working in any kind of those, but I believe that there's very deep data on just having a view of green space in a hospital room will rapidly increase somebody's outcomes.
Right. And that was Roger Ulrich's work actually back in 1984. Where they had people recovering from gallbladder surgery, a very common surgery. And one room looked out over a tree with leaves, and the other one looked out a window at a brown brick wall. And they found that the people that looked out at the tree complained less, took less pain medication, and stayed a shorter period in the hospital.
Isn't that incredible?
So that was kind of this groundbreaking research that a lot has been built on since then.
Did Stephen's work, because it sounds like Stephen and Bill were maybe kind of going at this about the same time. Were one informing the other, or were they both informed by E.O. Wilson, or how did that, do you know how that all came together? Or?
Yeah, I think Bill wrote a chapter in the Biophilic Design book. He was actually very instrumental in that book. And, so I think they were quite hand in hand at that point. And then I think Bill, took his concepts and I think he was working closely with Judith Herwigen at that time. And that was where Bill started creating the 14 patterns biophilic design.
Well, I was thinking, when did Tim Beatley come into that whole circle too?
I would have to look to see if Tim Beatley had written a chapter in the Biophilic Design book. I would have to check.
And for listeners, Tim Beatley, who is also we're interviewing for the podcast, he really has been working on biophilic cities. And how do you make a resilient biophilic city? And it has a whole network, or I shouldn't say Biophilic Cities is now a whole network around the world. And so we'll dig in with him further. But it is interesting to touch on, right? So there's sort of this larger concept. The design has really been popularized, whether that's a view or natural materials, or even, you read a lot about like green walls, right? Everybody's really into plants, bringing plants into their homes. I guess even having an animal, right? The affinity to connect with animals. I don't know how many people, millions of people have dogs and cats, and that's skyrocketed during the pandemic as well, right? But in a sense, that is
right. That's part of the connection. Yeah, right. It's the part of the connection between us and that which is living. And it's very healing too. People that actually help, rescue animals, and, there are prisoners actually that work with rescue animals and restore the plains, the sagebrush for grouse out in Oregon. And they find that those actions actually really help people heal themselves, because they're healing something else that's alive.
Yeah. No, I think that's really incredible. And, and then again, we talk a ton about walking in nature and just how beneficial that is, and the placemaking of a place, right? Whether that's a thoughtfully placed bench and you now have a view, or you put sidewalks into, or you have ability to go to a trailhead. Why are the national parks so beloved? Why are homes with water views more expensive or better landscaping, right? I would say.
Well, and porches. Like at Serenbe, where you have all of the front porches, that's facilitating community. People are stopping. And that's part of biophilic design as well. It's fostering a connection between people and nature, but also between people and each other, so that they become better stewards for nature and for each other.
Where do you see, because we talk a lot about, and we don't really talk about it with the general public, but I think we probably should. And when I say we, I mean Serenbe, we sort of talk about biophilic principles that are the basis of, the Serenbe model of building, if you will, right? Talk a little bit about how it's had an effect in building, with the different certifications or challenges, whether that's living, building, or well. Tell us a little bit about where those came from, or how involved you've been in, and the benefits.
Okay, well, I'm actually involved with the Well Building Standard. I've been a Well faculty member, and it's interesting because there's two biophilic features in the Well Building Standard. And one of them is, green space in the building and around the building. But it's so interesting because biophilia is really woven throughout the entire Well Building Standard in terms of eating natural foods, getting exercise, daylight. So, and it's a bit the same way with the living building certification as well, is that it's a piece of a petal, but when you really look at it, biophilia is the heart and soul of the flower. And so it's interesting because I'll give talks about that, kind of explaining how in both situations it's really woven deeply.
Well, and define for us, you started mentioning petals. Tell a little bit about how the Well certification works, because when you mention petals,
the petals is actually for the living building challenge.
Yes,
and they have petals.
Okay,
and Gosh, I don't have all that information right in front of me.
No, and I think the idea is that for the Living Building Challenge, at least, which is out of the Northeast, is you achieve certain levels of the challenge by each petal defines a different part of the challenge, right? There are different principles that are put in. And we should probably I know Amanda Sturgeon isn't there anymore, but she would be a wonderful interview actually to talk about the Living Building Challenge, because she really brought that to life over the years out of, I believe, Washington.
Right. Yes. Seattle.
And Atlanta, who people are very surprised, I think has the leading number of buildings that have qualified.
Oh, wow.
Well, and tell us, it was a Living Building Challenge, is the Candida building.
Yes.
And we talked about that with Dennis Creech a little bit in our second season. It's an incredible building on the Georgia Tech campus.
Mm-hmm. That's right. It's one of the best examples, I believe, that exists today on all the various principles. Mm-hmm. It not only reaches net zero, but it's a contributor in both water and energy.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But talk a little bit deeper about WELL and how that certification works. And was that sort of something that sort of grew out of the LEED in the green building world?
Well, it's a brother-sister program to LEED. Mm-hmm. And there's like about 100 features, mm-hmm. and there are some absolutes. There are prerequisites that you have to meet, mm-hmm. But it does deal with mobility in the workplace. Mm-hmm. It promotes sit-stand desks. It promotes mm-hmm. using stairs instead of elevators. Eating healthy food, having views to nature, proper mm-hmm. daylight without having glare. Because you can bring too much, light into a building and make it where people actually can't work. Having control over the comfort in your space. If people are too hot or too cold, they actually can't function well at work. So, right. But when you feel like you have the ability to crack a window to either cool off or to warm up, all of a sudden you feel empowered. But that kind of goes back to there again, how we evolved as a species. If you feel in control, then you're a happier, healthier person rather than feeling victimized by your environment. And so it's brought a lot of things to the forefront, because what happened with energy efficiency sometimes is that was about doing with less. And sometimes, the lighting was not comfortable lighting, but it was energy efficient. So I think sometimes it was hard for people to want to make an environment less comfortable for them to save on energy. Whereas the idea of biophilic design is that it's, instead of a low impact design, it's a positive impact design.
That's a great differentiator. So who is sort of, I know obviously Bill's doing incredible work out there. You're out there doing incredible stuff that I want to talk about in a minute. But who else is out there? I know we're going to talk to Tim Beatley, like popularizing the concept, or is anybody really taking the mantle, I guess is the question.
It seems that there's a lot of folks talking about biophilic design. A lot of the industry in terms of the green walls, green roofs are embracing it. Sometimes it turns to a more technological solution, and sometimes that's appropriate and sometimes that's not appropriate. If you're in a subway that has no views to the outside, no opportunity to create courtyards full of wildlife and birds and fountains, then maybe you do have to bring technology down there so that people feel a sense of aliveness. Images of nature or sounds of nature to just kind of settle people down a bit. But it's all very it's all specific to the place. But in terms of just listing folks, I right off the bat, a lot of firms are embracing biophilic design at this point, though. Yeah.
And again, there's no need nobody has to take the mantle. I think with the Biophilic Institute and the Biophilic Summit that obviously has been put on hold, the idea was how do we bring all these people together, because we find, I think all of us do in any industry group. It could be, breast cancer research or, information on multiple sclerosis. Everybody's working in silos. And so how do we bring all of the leaders together to share their work and sort of further amplify the importance of it? And so we're hoping to get back to, in 2021. But tell me a little bit about what you're doing today, because I know you're actually, now, did you sell the house in Vermont? You're halfway in New Orleans. What's going on? You're a little bit halfway.
Yeah, I'm between Vermont and New Orleans. I've got a house in Burlington, Vermont, and I have a house now in New Orleans. So it gets me going past Serenbe a lot, which is great.
We love that. We love that.
But yeah, I just started a project for the Hawaii Correctional Facility. And it's a sustainability master plan, and I'm their biophilia expert. So what's really
cool.
What's really neat about that is the idea of biophilia and well-being as being part of a master plan, and that being one of the goals is reducing recidivism, having folks that can really come out of a correctional facility and be happier and healthier and function is the goal, and not go back to prison. So that's really an exciting, groundbreaking project. And then another project is working with an indigenous community in central Alabama. They're creating an eco village for their community, and they are it's the Muskogee tribe, and their language is going extinct, but they can't keep their language alive without keeping the way they live alive. So going back to the earth, embracing the ancestral land and way of living is the way to keep their community happier, healthier, and that language alive. So it's fascinating work that's all, both are pulled into connecting with nature.
Mm-hmm. No, I think it's super important, the work that you're doing. And obviously we want to tell people the story. Is there somewhere that they can reach out to you if they want you to do work with them?
Sure.
Where can we find you, Liz?
I'm online. If you can, my company's Calabrese Architects, and it's Liz at calabresearchitects.com.
Great.
But you can usually find me or through the Biophilic Design monograph. That's open source online.
Yeah, well, and we'll definitely put that up on the website. But as we're sort of closing out, I would love to hear from you, with everything that's happening from a ecological perspective, around the world. Obviously, we're in the midst of these wildfires. We just had a huge, we've had all these storms that are coming up from the Gulf Coast. What's sort of your thought? I mean, I love the idea if everybody could bring on a director of biophilia, or, and like you said, really integrated into the master plan of all the work that they're doing. Like, how do we get more people to do that? Do we have hope?
I think so. But it really comes down to working hand in hand with nature instead of working against it, because as we can tell, nature will win.
Unfortunately,
we can't fight nature. So if we embrace it and love it and work with it and know the power of it, I can't say that we won't be have catastrophes or storms, but we can work more eloquently and mindfully, with nature and work with the water, not against it.
Right. Well, I thank you so much for spending time with us. Is there anything else you want to add before we go? Any final words of wisdom from EO or Stephen Kellert?
Let me close with a quote from Steve Kellert, because I hadn't given one of his quotes. And he says, "Biophilic design is not about greening our buildings or simply increasing their aesthetic appeal through inserting trees and shrubs. Much more, it's about humanity's place in nature and the natural world's place in human society." And I think that's lovely.
Liz, the quotes that you've chosen from these people really puts a beautiful foundation that I've heard in a different way today. And so thank you very much for doing that.
Oh, you're welcome. It was my pleasure.
Well, Liz, we look forward to seeing you back at Serenbe again. We know that we'll find you on your drives soon.
and also, and if anybody wants to know these books and whatnot, just reach out to me, or I can give you guys.
Yeah, we'd love a list, and we'll link them out for everybody. We'd love to. Our goal is really just to amplify all the goodness and bring people into the hope.
Sounds great. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Liz. There are two rubrics in building a city. You can follow the sprawl mentality, or you can preserve land while boosting economic development. Serenbe builds and designs to be both beautiful and environmentally sustainable. If you're a city planner, developer, landowner, or policymaker, there are common sense solutions you can take to build a biophilic-centered community. Attend the Nigran Placemaking Conference this fall to learn more. Details at nigranplacemaking.com. That's NYGRENPLACEMAKING.com. Thank you for listening to Serenbe Stories. New episodes are available on Mondays. Please rate and review the podcast and visit our website to learn more about upcoming guests, episodes, and everything biophilia at serenbestories.com.